And once again, we are recording to the cloud. There's Dominic showing off his lovely SaaSOps community mug. I have mine too, and I know I should have brought it down, but welcome. This is the 8th episode of SolveTank, the SaaSOps live virtual event that we call Solve. This is SolveTank, where we get a vendor on, we get them to do a fast-paced, in-depth demo, and then we are a collection of SaaSOps professionals from around the world ask questions and then give our feedback on the product. So today we have Michael from Movebot.io, which is an application to help you move your data. And obviously in episode 19 of our regular Solve, we actually had a whole call meeting and discussion about migrating user and data. So this demo is probably going to be very topical for a lot of what we've recently discussed. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm going to pass it over to Michael.
Hey guys. Yeah, thanks for giving me some of your time. I'll try to keep it relatively informal and sort of get to a discussion point. And just open it up for questions faster than normal. And I won't do a presentation or anything like that, but we can do sort of a live demo where we actually move some data across. And that's probably the best way to actually see the product, see what we can do and what we're focusing on at the moment. So maybe first I can give a bit of an introduction on the company. So we're actually a company called CouchDrop, which was started a couple of years ago, I think probably 3 years ago now, so a relatively new startup. And it was at the throes of a previous company that I founded that dealt with networks and network security. But CouchDrop was basically, or is an SFTP server for the cloud. So if you've got some legacy sort of workflows that you're working with, we would turn any of the cloud storage providers into an SFTP server or SCP server. So you can use them with your sort of legacy automated systems, or you can dish them out to customers as well as an FTP server, as an SFTP server. In the process of doing that, we started to get asked a lot about migrations. And there were a few customers who were actually using us to migrate data, albeit in a very horrific sort of way, right? So using our FTP server to push data up into Google Drive or to push it into Box, this sort of stuff. And because we had the virtualization layer already for the various different cloud storage engines, we thought, well, surely migrations could be pretty easy. So we started taking a look at this space. And what we kind of found pretty quickly off the bat was that there seemed to be more migration tools in the community than anything else. So it's certainly a very, very saturated market, right? There's a lot of tools at the low end of the market and a couple of big companies that are doing things for the enterprise clients in a very expensive way. But what was kind of missing was an SME sort of product. And the main things that we found was the products that were out there were very, very sort of techie and subscription based. And no one was really doing a sort of a one-off tool for migrations that was very easy to use. Someone could just come and click and go, put their credit card number in and sort of walk away and do it in a very cost-effective way. So we built Movebot first as a product that was just built into the interface for CouchDrop. But that confused a lot of people, as it would. So we spun it out into a separate product and a separate interface and whatnot, and here we are. And the way that I sort of would, I'm not the sales guy, obviously, but the way I kind of sell it to people is it's very simple, and it's very cost effective. Simplicity obviously comes at a cost in itself, right? So there's not a million different things you can tweak and whatnot, but if you want to be able to tweak a million different things, then you can build your own tool or go and sort of hack together something else. So we built something which is very simple to drive, which you'll see, and at an incredibly competitive price point. So probably the biggest kind of revelation when we hit this cloud migration market arena was that companies were charging $1, $2 a gig to transfer data. And often they'd be doing it with a solution that you had to host yourself. I personally find that kind of insane, right? If you're going to be paying more for the data migration than you're actually paying for the cloud storage, it starts to become a bit of a problem. And while there are a lot of customers or companies who only have a couple of 100 gig of data, we find most companies will have around that 5 to 10 terabyte mark. When you combine, several years worth of documents and media files and whatnot, and so it becomes very, very cost prohibitive to actually migrate that data, and it's obviously a barrier to getting into the cloud to start with. So we've priced the product very competitively, and it's fully hosted. Aside from the Windows agent, right? So there's no need to spin up servers or anything like that. It's we run it on our own data center infrastructure, which is obviously just a bit of AWS and a few other providers. And yeah, you put your credit card number in, you click source destination, and if you're really game, you add some permissions and whatnot, and away you go. I think the price point is worth noting is around 30 cents a gig versus $1 to $2 per gig. And our business is heating up quite dramatically, especially with the acquisition of Cloud FastPath by Box like a week or 2 weeks ago now. So there's a lot of customers who are sort of looking at that and going, "Wow, we don't have anything at the high end of the spectrum," and so they're coming to us. I'll touch on what we don't do because it's quite important as well. So probably every call we have on the sales side of things, we get asked, especially with techies or MSPs, right? We get asked about email migrations. Kind of sick of hearing about email migrations, to be honest. I'm personally of the opinion that you should try and not do everything. You should actually do something very well. So we've taken quite a hard stance on not doing email migrations at the moment, and that obviously means in some cases with a migration you have to use multiple tools potentially, but there's a million different email migration tools available, and I think a lot of them are quite good. So they serve the market quite well. Versus the cloud storage or the migration side of things is for cloud storage is, I would say, not served terribly well. We've certainly heard a few horror stories, and yeah, there seems to be quite a mismatch of what people want and what's actually available. Yeah. I'm not sure how you normally do this, whether you want to open it up a bit more for questions now, or we can go straight into a bit of a demo.
Yeah, let's move over onto the demo, get moving through that, and then we can ask some questions towards the end. We've got about, I guess, another 40 minutes. If you do sort of a 15-minute, 20-minute demo, it gives us sort of 10 minutes for questions and then a bit of a wrap up. But yeah, thanks for the history and the thought behind Movebot. But yeah, I know that would really be interesting to see it in action.
Okay, so we'll get straight into it then. I've set up a thought the most common migration that we do at the moment, and it has been pretty much since day one, has been Dropbox to Google, without a doubt, for whatever reason that might be. The next most common would be, or the emerging most common migration at the moment would be on-prem, going into Google. And I think probably once we get the move semantic functionality up and running properly, and it comes out of beta, I would say that that's probably going to come in second or come in third, just because there's not really anything else in the market that does that. And there's a lot of demand going Google to Google. But so this is our product interface. You don't need like to talk to us to get up and running with this. You can absolutely just come to our website, sign in, put your credit card number in, and away you go. And we get quite a few customers who do that. We sort of have two different customer groups, right? The consumers that will come and just run a simple migration, and then the MSPs or techies that will come and use the product to run larger migrations over a longer period of time. So to sort of deal with that in some way, we have the product separated into projects and into simple migrations. A simple migration, you can't really break it. It's really just you set a source, you set a destination, and away you go. There's no fancy options like permissions and whatnot. It's very simple. And early out in the evolution of the product, we would sit there and watch consumers go through the workflow and make mistakes based on errors and whatnot. So we would try and make it so that it wasn't possible to actually make any mistakes unless you thought you were sort of buying chips. And you were trying to do a migration instead. What I'll focus on here is the organization project migration. I've already created one, but I'll go sort of back through that process. I created it just so that I could set up the OAuth and the delegated API controls before the call. But effectively, you've got a name. So project name is just something arbitrary you can stick in. Then we configure the source. In this case, we've got Dropbox. It's a normal OAuth process with Dropbox. With some of the other providers, it's not. I'm not sure whether Zoom allows you to see the drop down, and Google doesn't. So
we can see it.
You can see it. Yeah. So that gives you some idea as to the platforms that we support. You basically support all of the cloud platforms. And then it goes out to also supporting things like Samba and S3 compatible endpoints. So if you've got block storage somewhere pretty much anywhere, right, and it's compliant with the S3 API, which most block storage is, then you can move to and from block storage. We don't allow we don't restrict combinations, so you can go from any of these to them and vice versa as well, and within themselves as well. But it's not something many people do. So you got your source, you configure that. You then do the same thing on the destination side. So in this case, we're doing Google, and it's the G Suite or the Google Workspace domain as opposed to an individual Google account. We access your Google domain via the delegated API controls. So you get in our platform your own service account that we generate, and you have to go through the process of adding our scope and our ID. There is just worth noting with Google, you have a limit on ingestion of 750 gig per day, right? So if you're moving terabytes of data into Team drives, you can get that across faster by enabling the additional connectors, which will allow you to link multiple accounts. It's a little bit convoluted since we changed how we did the service account stuff. So you actually have to either talk to us and we'll sort of use the same service account across all the connectors, or go and add multiple delegated controls there. But yeah, that'll give you quite a performance boost. And we've done some migrations. We've been going into Google, and we've pushed 4 or 5 terabytes a day to sort of get a 20 terabyte migration done over over a weekend sort of thing. So you can pump it through. It's just a horrible process of going and setting up service accounts and whatnot. It's worth noting the same thing applies for SharePoint as well. But SharePoint is, I'd say Google is pretty bad as far as API rate limiting and general limits go. SharePoint is 100 times worse. Trying to get data in and out of that is quite a mission. And yeah, so it gets now to sort of more the crux of the config. And mapping's like probably the thing where you'll spend most of the time in a project-based migration, right? And mapping is basically saying, hey, I want data that's in this user's account to go into this user's account or into this team drive. And here you can see our Dropbox organization. It's a small one. And you can see our sort of Google demo organization. So you get the team drives and the users in one sort of flow here, and you can basically just select. I think I have some data in here, so we could go dev, going into dev at CouchDrop demo. Now, obviously, that doesn't really scale if you've got a larger migration that you're doing. So there is the ability for us to auto discover user and drive mappings. Probably the most unused feature in the whole platform, though, I would say. No one seems to want to let us discover where they should be taking data from and putting it into. So most users or organizations will actually use the CSV import functionality. So here you can just provide us with a CSV file. You can do it as many times as you want, and that will effectively create mappings. The common sort of workflow is that someone will come in here and they'll add a mapping, and then they'll kind of test that out and see what happens and make sure that we don't delete a bunch of data somewhere. And then they'll come back and add another block of users via the CSV. I'll kind of skip a little bit over that now and just go into some of the more tricky features, let's say, so permissions and metadata. So we are able to preserve permissions. It's again something which is actually not used. It's always asked for, but it's not used as much as you would think. I think people take the opportunity to sort of rethink permissions when they're doing a migration, especially when you're going from platforms that don't support things like team drives and whatnot, and you're going into a platform that does. It's a good opportunity to actually change how you've been doing things. And some customers are terrified of migrating permissions over and really do want to have a clean slate where they can actually go through that process again. There is no big bang with our product either. So you could stage a migration over 6 months if you want. Wouldn't recommend it. You'll get so annoyed with it by the end of that you probably want to kill yourself. But you don't have sort of one big process where our platform's got to go and do the whole migration at once. You can cherry pick your migration and your pathway there, which kind of lends itself a little bit to not bring permissions over. But if you want to bring permissions over, you can. And this is how you configure it. So we try and deal with most of the details ourselves, but you've got a few different mapping strategies you can use. You can import mappings. If you're going out of box, you can provide us with a collaborators report and whatnot. And yeah, mod time generally is always preserved, and you can also choose to preserve versions. So if you have a need to keep older versions of files, you can enable that. It's again something that's not really used that frequently, and it does incur quite a performance cost. So if you go to migrate versions across, then sort of prepare for it the migration to take a lot longer. And because you're often coming out of what is probably archival storage to some degree, retrieving those versions can actually be really quite slow. This is you shouldn't really do this, all versions. This can turn into quite a nightmare. File type's not really that interesting, but one of the things that is worth talking about quickly, I think, because it's always a problem, is sanitization and sort of doc type and whatnot conversion. So we try and make it so that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to change any of your files in the source and whatnot. We look after all of that sanitization for you based on a bunch of rules in the platform. So if you're going from, for example, Google into SharePoint, which was the ultimate sort of don't do combination, Google allows you to have files that, well, you can have // and file names and folder names, right? Which I think is the worst case. SharePoint won't allow you to do anything like that. So you have to do this conversion or prepare for most of your files not to be migrated across. We look after that for you. So we have a bunch of rules which will do that conversion on the fly, and we keep getting asked for some insight and some ability to modify these sorts of rules. So shortly in this particular display here, you'll actually be able to change how that sanitization looks like. So if you've got a colon character in a file name in Google, then you'll be able to say, hey, I want this to be a space or an S or something like that. We'll offer you a few different modes as well. And then, yeah, there's some generalized settings, some tuning stuff you can do. You're able to choose a region, which is fairly useful as well. So our main data center or main cloud provider is DigitalOcean at the moment, and then AWS on top of that. But as a result, you can choose to run the job in a particular locale, which is a performance boost. Sometimes if you're going from an on-prem server, like if you're migrating data from a server in London or in the UK, and our servers are in San Francisco, there's actually quite a bit of additional latency there for the on-prem stuff. So it's always a good idea to actually choose the right location. Cloud to cloud, it gets more interesting, right? Because you can't always guarantee where your data is actually going or where it's going to be domiciled. So you may not necessarily get a performance benefit from that. And yeah, I think I've probably talked about these options too much, but what we've got here now is that mapping that we did earlier has shown up. It's very unusual that you would have an organization with just one mapping, so I'll probably just create another. And as a bit of just an intro to this part of the interface, your different projects are up here. So you can have a whole bunch of different migrations on the go, past, present, future sort of thing as well. And you just choose, select between them. It's pretty straightforward, but we'll add another couple of mappings. I'll just do dev2 to dev2. And for the sake of team drives, so one thing to note about the mappings is you can drill down and carve it up however you want, right? So you could take a particular folder which is located in a particular user and bring that across into a team drive. If you're going, say, for example, Box into Google, Box has no notion of shared content or team drives. It's just user-owned content and then shared out. So you could actually, as part of the migration, carve it up and say, okay, well, this folder is a team drive, so I'm actually going to move it across and stick it in here. And so now you have a couple more mappings, right? What I will do is, for the sake of just check something, we'll just kick 2 of those off. And so if you're what's happening now is we're spinning up compute nodes for that migration. It's one of the ways that we deal with the security concerns and the performance element is by effectively spinning up virtual machines for each migration or each project. That means that your migration is not competing with anyone else's, and it's isolated. It's a little bit more secure by design. There's nothing else running on those temporary nodes. They could last 5 minutes if you wanted. The side effect of that is that the actual starting of the migration takes a couple of minutes. And we've had some people come in and go, I'll do some performance testing. So I'll migrate 4 gig or 5 gig from A to B, and they expect it to take 30 seconds, but actually starting the node takes a couple of minutes, and then there's the calculating side of things, and then finally it gets to the data transfer stage. If you're looking at a larger group of migrations, it helps to have some stats right across the board. So we try and give you a little bit of that here on the project, but all the juicy information is really inside the job itself, and it's still in the starting stage, but soon this will start populating and change quite a bit, and we'll get some graphs and whatnot. But you have this notion of sort of execution, or what we would call a job instance. So you can run normally in the space of doing a migration. You would do a delta once you've done the cutover. And you might run the migration several times just to kind of iron out any issues or play with the settings a little bit. And so you can toggle between different instances. You see now it's actually up and running. So it's done the calculating stage, which is effectively the discovery. It's actually going a bit probably too fast. Now it's making directories and setting up that structure. And we're going to get into the transferring stage pretty shortly. As the product has sort of evolved from a consumer offering to something that is meant to be simple enough for consumers to use, but is being used by engineers, we're having to show you a bit more information and sort of help you out a little bit. So you get quite rich details, right? We've got this sort of log tail that you can use to mostly just check to make sure it's actually still running. If it's been sitting there for a while and you're thinking, is this actually operating or is it dead in the water? The log will kind of give you some idea there. And you've got performance insights as well. So long-running jobs can take days, right? And often it's a case of trying to figure out why that is. So we give you some metrics in here that you can use to kind of understand that. The most useful one is definitely the rate limiting, because that generally tends to be the thing that stickles you, right? Is the rate limiting, and everything else is part and parcel. If it's going really slow, what you can do is come in here and you can add nodes. So you could say, hey, money is no obstacle. I'd like 10 nodes, please, Movebot, and we will go and spin up a bunch more compute nodes. Don't do that if there's rate limiting, because you'll see that in the red graph here. You just cost us money and you cost yourself money, and it won't improve the performance. But yeah, you can tune it quite a bit. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing, and we'll hopefully automate, or we plan on automating it pretty shortly, is is that optimization. Rather than charging people for additional worker nodes, we may actually hide that functionality away and just try and push the migration as fast as physically possible. Because for us, like, we want the migration to be done as soon as possible. We don't want it to drag on and on and on, because then we can't bill you, right? We always bill you after the migration is done. So we want to be able to get you in and get you out as fast as possible. And that's what you kind of want from a migration, I'd say as well, right? It shouldn't take a long time. This is actually good because it is taking a second. I got a lot of files in there, I guess. But you can see in real time what it's transferring and whatnot. And yeah, it's going to basically finish in a second, I think. Give you a bit of information. I'm hoping I get a failure, but I may not. But let's just hope. Here you get some information on your data. It's not so interesting. The thing that I always look at is the file sizes, because the file sizes kind of dictate a lot of the performance. If you had 10 million small files that were 2 or 3 kilobytes, the overheads with transferring that are actually going to be on the API rather than the actual data transfer. And so it's going to take longer than if you had 100,000 large files. So that's always interesting. And yeah, we give you some data on what the file structure looks like. If there were failures, actually there's a retry on that one. You would see them here. There's some more interesting details under here. And then if we were doing a permission migration, you would see the permissions that we've detected and that we're going to apply. And yeah, the one thing that people always, I'd say, look for would be the flagged issues or the warnings. So these are, if we're doing sanitization, or if we've detected that you're trying to push 500,000 files into a shared drive in Google, we will pick it up here and give you a warning. You can always still just do the migration. If it fails, it fails, and only certain files will most likely fail. So we don't encourage people to fret too much about the issues unless they are unresolvable. If they're unresolvable, like you've got files that are way too big for the storage provider, then you could do something about that prior to doing the migration. If the big one is the 400,000 file limit in Google Team drives, that's something that you do want to deal with prior to running it, because otherwise you'll end up with a bit of a state, right? And it's going to be done by now. I know, almost.
Well, this is really good to see.
And we don't have any failures, so that's crappy, because the failures are kind of one of the, I would say one of the, well, it's where I spend most of my time, unfortunately. And it's where we're probably putting 90% of our attention, right? So if any particular file fails, you will see it here. And if there's more than 10%, or if more than 10% of files fail during a migration, we'll actually halt it prematurely, just because there's no point. If you're running a migration, you've got 5 million files, and 10% of them have failed, you probably don't want to keep trying to do that migration. But we give you quite a bit of detail in this, and we'll show you the underlying error that's come from the storage provider, and we try and give you a more human error and whatnot. And you can choose to rerun failures, which is generally the thing that you should do. We attempt to retry failures 20 times by default. You can actually see that in here, as we saw before. Like, the folder creation here has actually been retried. So something caused it to fail the first time we ran that make directory command, and so we had to do it again. Actually, a few of these did, so we probably got hit with a little bit of eventual consistency going into Google. But yeah, I can potentially dig up some failures from somewhere else just to give you an idea as to what that looks like. But
well,
yeah,
I think this is really good. I think we get the idea, and I'm reassured. I'm sure other people are, to hear that you're focused on resolving the issues. Because having done some migrations myself, I know trying to resolve those issues are the hardest part. And obviously, when we all discussed migrations a couple of weeks ago, we did discuss and talk a lot about doing housekeeping beforehand and sorting out what actually does need to be migrated. And it's just like if you move house, you don't move your junk, you throw it in the dumpster before you move house. So it's that process beforehand. I wanted to give our guys a chance to ask some questions. I think Brian has one.
I put it in the chat, but if you had mentioned this already, apologize, but how do you handle native, like cloud native files, like a Google Doc or like a Dropbox, like whatever Dropbox uses, in these transfers, or do you just ignore them, or like how do you handle it?
We ignore Google Paper at the moment, but we won't very shortly. Sorry, not Google Paper, Dropbox Paper. Google's obviously the big one there. I think they were probably the first to have their own sort of proprietary formats. We export them. So Google provides a way to export and import into sort of native formats. So we utilize that. The issue with that is that there's an 11 meg limit. So if you've got more than 11 meg in your Google file, like your Google Doc or whatnot, we actually can't get it out of the platform. So you'll see that as a failure in the system, and then you're kind of left to your own devices to deal with that, unfortunately. It's one of the appeals of what we call the move semantic, which is an API-based move as opposed to a sort of a transfer. But yeah, you see that if when we configured the project, there were these options here. You've got this automatic doc type conversion, and if we were actually coming out of Google, then you would see that doc type conversion was required in this part of the interface.
What happens if you're doing a Google to Google migration? I'm assuming that keeps the doc as a native format and doesn't do the conversion.
No, it doesn't, unless you are doing the move or using the move semantic, which is the API based move. It's because we can't, from an API perspective, actually get Google's native file out. It's not possible. At some point, I'd hope that they allow you, but yeah, it's not something that is available through the API. So we have to perform this export, which is again like why we are or have embarked on this ordeal, trying to do an API based move for Google, and potentially we'll try it for other providers as well. But the biggest demand is definitely inside Google. And yeah, in that case, you also you lose file IDs and whatnot as well, which most of the time is not a big problem. But for customers working in the Google sphere, I think it is, because they've given links to every man and his dog, right?
Yes. Yeah. Maintaining those document IDs is the hardest part of doing a Google to Google migration. And the biggest stumbling block that I know our colleagues that are normally on the call always struggle with.
Yeah. And the API-based migration keeps those IDs, don't they?
It does, but it does on the files at least. For folders, you can't move folders across organizations. So we actually have to recreate or create new folders. So you lose them, but that's not really an issue right now in sharing out folder IDs or links with folder IDs. And
not that many people anyway.
And what about, so like with Google Docs, there's like comments and annotations, and I think with some of the other providers, there's also that sort of commenting around documents. Do you just drop all of that as you do a move, or is there some way?
Yeah, we do. At least when we're doing the sort of download and upload based transfer, none of that data is pulled across. We haven't really struck that question, to be honest. Like we've struck it in the form of metadata inside Box and inside SharePoint. People want to move that across, but yeah, I kind of, to some degree, of the opinion that falls under the same thing as mail, right? I don't think we've done a perfect job of transferring the data across yet, and I'd like to do that first before trying to drag all the metadata and other stuff that goes along with it, like calendars and goodness knows what else people will start asking for. So we are focused on that data. If you do use the move Google to Google, I'd need to verify it, but I would suspect that the comments are moved across.
Yeah, they are. So when you do the move with your move semantic feature, because you're moving the actual file, everything that is in the file remains. Whereas if you're doing a traditional create, share, copy process, then everything gets lost. So moving through a team drive, which I'm assuming is what you're doing, it is exactly the same file, and it's quite a neat little trick that Google have introduced with the shared drives, where you can move a file from one Google system to another using the team drive as the conduit, and it remains the original file. So everything in there, from permissions to history to comments, all remain, which is effectively the holy grail when it comes to Google to Google migrations.
I've got one question. I know we've only got Steve, you got one?
Yeah, I just had a question. So, Michael, you mentioned the challenge you have around converting documents larger than the 11 meg size, and obviously Paul's familiar with the migration tool that he built in the past. I'm just wondering, does Cloud and Migrate take a different approach to copying those files across, whereby they're not converting it from Google Doc to Microsoft document and back into the Google Doc, but rather they are saying, okay, here's this file on the source Google domain, give the person on the destination domain access to that file, and then initiate a copy. And the Google to Google copy function allows you to get around that 11 meg limit, because you're not actually converting the document. You're just saying, make a native Google copy, and then put that newly owned file in the location that I want it in. So, do a file rename if you need to, or just make a copy and place it in the correct spot.
Potentially, I'm actually not too sure, but I suspect that would do the trick. That sort of stuff we've up until now we've kind of shied away from, because it's most of them, well, pretty much all the migrations have been going from one cloud storage provider to a new one, or coming from on-prem. I think if we start entering into the Google to Google, there are a bunch of tricks there that we can use that don't come under this sort of download upload path. Pretty gnarly, to be honest. Like the work that we've been doing on the Move stuff is a hack, to say the least. It's while it might be nice that Google have now provided a way to transfer files across via team drives, that's a hack. Like in my world, when you're building you're building software solutions, that's literally the definition, right? They've got some underlying constraint in their platform and that they haven't been able to solve. And so they've done the cheapest thing that they can do without solving the real problem, which is by pulling it across via these team drives. I'm very weary of those sorts of things because they tend to introduce bugs and edge cases that you don't foresee, and they crop up and bite you in the neck at the worst possible time.
And Paul, did Cloud Migrate did that actually do that share with the source file and then make the copy? Is that how you handled that?
I think if I was going to do a migration tool and I didn't have the team drive functionality, that's the way that I would have done it.
Okay.
So I have a question. So you happily provided your underlying cloud providers. And because my company is very, very wary of the environment and on carbon-free energy providers, both of your providers are not very happy to share numbers of their data centers, how green their energy is, how they handle recycling, etc. So is there anything you do in addition to what they claim to do, especially AWS, they claim to do something, which is basically nothing in contrast to what Google is doing? Is there anything you do in addition to their offsetting, or are you planning to move to a more reasonable cloud provider?
Our biggest, so we're effectively a startup, right? So we're not offsetting anything ourselves just yet, simply because we're way too young to have got to that kind of stage. We use DigitalOcean because their data transfer rates are 10 times cheaper than Google and than AWS. And the constraint with our business is data transfer. It's solely that, right? We're not charging by the user or anything like that. So we just charge per gig, which means we have to drag that actual cost of transferring that data per gig down. I'd love to be in GCP or in AWS completely because they are better providers, but we can't because they charge 9 cents and above for data transfer. That would mean that we would have to charge $1 per gig kind of thing. Well, we wouldn't, but it's like you can see how these things start to escalate.
I rather pay up for green underlying technology than have a cheap migration. And you being a startup doesn't excuse you not thinking about that, because my company as well is a startup essentially. And you have to think about this in this day and age from the start and price it in.
Yeah, thanks for your viewpoint, Dominic, and keeping us aware of the green and renewable resource aspect of the technologies that we're using. I'm sure while you would be prepared to pay the higher price, I'm sure a lot of other customers purely look at the cost of their migration as opposed to any potential environmental impact of that migration. But as we get to the top of the hour, I know people have got to drop and go to other calls. I do have one more question, if I can squeeze it in, Michael. I like the fact that you did have that automated ability to do the scans and do the automatic mapping between the users on one service, the source to the destination. And I can understand why people might not want to use that. Do you have the facility to run that mapping and then export it to check it and verify it and then utilize what you have discovered?
It shows up. So not to export it, but it shows up here basically. So if you ran that mapping and you had 100 users or 1,000 users, you would see it populate here. And if there were errors in the mapping, you'd see it crop up as well, where we've found a source, but we haven't got a destination for it.
Okay. Yeah, I guess a lot of admins would want to verify, because it would be terrible that, Dave at Dropbox got, Dave V's at Google's, data, and then trying to reverse any migration mistakes would be, oh, that's my phone talking to me again, would be an absolute nightmare. And I know I like to export things because I find things are easier to look at in a spreadsheet, and you can filter things and you can cross-reference, as opposed to having the data on a web page. But certainly,
it's something like that's something that can be sort of built right across the board. So any data that you see in the product could in theory be exported, right? I'll add that to the ever-growing list.
And if people have interest in learning more, they, as you say, just go to movebot.io and sign themselves up and do a migration.
Yeah, absolutely. Or get in touch with us, right? And we try and work really closely with partners, because it's how we get basically recurring revenue. And so we're more than happy to spend time with you and go through initial migrations and whatnot. We don't charge for that component. We will charge a company if they want really like dedicated support for a migration, but that's not something we do with the MSPs. So we won't charge techies for that, because you guys are hopefully gonna feed back information into the product, and you're going to bring us recurring customers. So we kind of want to be friends, right?
Yeah, and that's what Solve is all about. And these SolveTank episodes, I know everybody that's on here will take away this knowledge, and those people that are watching on the YouTubes later on will hopefully like, share, subscribe, and do everything else they need to do. Well, thank you, Michael, for joining us today and giving you the demo.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michael.